guys, welcome back to the next YouTube channel. I'm here with Jared Powell, shoulder specialist, and we're going to talk on bicep tendonitis or tendinopathy within powerlifting. So if you could give a quick intro on yourself, and then we will jump straight into it.
I'm Jared, I'm a physio. I only treat shoulders, I hate everything else. I'm obsessed with it, I'm passionate about it because it's so bloody complicated. Hopefully I can reveal some of my insights to you today.
Yeah, so if we just talked about bicep tendinopathy in general, it would be a huge conversation, but within powerlifting, when we do low bar squatting and we're loaded in this really awkward position with hundreds of kilos, with a lot of volume each week, just building it throughout a prep, lifters often come to me as a coach and present with pain at the elbow here on the outside of the elbow, up the bicep and then the outside of the arm, at the shoulder itself. Like I've seen it in many different ways, presented in lots of different exercises. It can go from anywhere from a dull ache to really acute pain at the bottom of the bench press. From my experience, it comes from low bar squatting, like I said, rather than the bench press, but maybe you could start by explaining like what they're feeling. Like why do we get them all around and everywhere, and what's happening?
So biceps tendinopathy, usually, so it afflicts the long head of the biceps, and the long head of the biceps travels through the bicipital groove here and attaches to the superior glenoid, and it's encapsulated within this tiny groove, so the bicipital groove. So if you were to overload the biceps tendon, which is what happens in a biceps tendinopathy, it gets full of fluid and actually thickens. Then what it does is that tendon actually starts to occupy more space within that groove. It's got nowhere to go, effectively. And so when it's got nowhere to go, it can start to impinge and infringe and sort of friction and rub on structures in the area, and that can cause nociception, which can then result in pain. So that's the sort of classic sort of biceps tendinopathy mechanism of injury, and that pain usually is felt at the anterior part of the shoulder. It can go down the arm a little bit, sometimes can go to the elbow itself, but it's usually manifest around the anterior part of the shoulder. So it's this issue of, it's almost always a non-traumatic overuse injury that comes on over time. It's usually in response to doing too much too soon, like every other tendinopathy.
That's powerlifting.
Exactly right.
We do too much too all the time.
and spot on. And with your sport, the force has to go somewhere, right? It's not like it's just physics. You put a force through a system and something has to absorb it. And so with powerlifting, especially when you're getting back into that squatting position, abduction, external rotation, there's a hell of a lot of load going through the anterior shoulder. And if the rest of your shoulder's not working optimally, like your rotator cuff or something like that, then your long-headed biceps is going to cop the brunt of the force, which may cause pain and symptoms down the line.
Yeah, and in powerlifting, I've said many times that it's not the most mobile sport, but nor does it need to be. As in, like, we do squat, bench, deadlift, 1 RMs, that's it. That's all you need to really be able to do to get white lights in a competition and to progress to some degree. Which is a pro of the sport because it allows us to program really specifically and get ahead. But it's also a negative because, like you said, these overuse injuries, we just do the same thing over and over, you get beat up and it becomes a problem. But what I'm saying is that people get less and less mobile out of a necessity for the sport, not a terrible thing, but a symptom of the sport. And then when we get there, not only are we at end range at the shoulder, like you said, but then also the scaps are pinned back and we have just literally nowhere to go. We just run out of room and then we're loading hundreds of kilos through there. Muscles can't do their job effectively. It's just a recipe for disaster, really, if it's not managed correctly. And a lot of it comes from my end, as in, like, you know, programming appropriately so that loads are slowly ramping up over time, so that we have appropriate fatigue management, load management, all that kind of stuff that we can throw around on my end. But on your end, is there anything that you think we can do to prevent it before we get to that stage? Like anything that you think powerlifters could, like, you know, do this exercise? Not that you want to like one exercise that'll change your life, nothing like that. But is there anything that pops out as something powerlifters don't do?
I have a philosophy that might help. I certainly don't have an exercise, but I think that there's no universal truths, unfortunately. But in my experience and what the data shows is that a long head of biceps issue, pathology, symptoms might emerge only in response, or most often in response to weakness of the rotator cuff. And sometimes we think the biceps tendon is actually the 5th rotator cuff muscle. And so if the other 4 rotator cuff muscles aren't working optimally, whatever that means, then there might be more load thrown through the biceps tendon. So if somebody was to develop some form of anterior shoulder pain and we think it's in some way being contributed to by the long head of the biceps tendon, first thing I'll do is I'll look at the rotator cuff strength, endurance, function, etc., etc. Now, almost always, and this is my experience and it's anecdotal, I'll see that that person will have a deficit, impairment, or reduction of strength, usually endurance strength, of their rotator cuff, which is forcing long-headed biceps pain. So in terms of prevention, I cannot emphasize enough how important that rotator cuff strength is. So you should be able to lie on your side with a 3 to 4 kilo dumbbell and do 20 to 25 repetitions slowly, 2 seconds down, 2 seconds up with minimal fatigue. If you're not getting that as a powerlifter and you're wanting to put thousands of newtons of load through your shoulder, I think something's going to break down eventually, and perhaps it might be the long head of the biceps tendon.
Yeah, like I said, we can get away with that in our sport. I think that's almost the problem, is that you can get away with all this stuff because we have to do one rep in competition with 3 movements, and they're pretty. Although we like to think that we squat really deep and stuff like that, they're not a huge. We're not jumping and throwing and doing crazy stuff like that. So say that we have completely ignored your advice and developing midway. I don't know. I'm 6 weeks out from a competition. My biceps are on fire. I can't bench press because there's just so much inflammation. I'm living off Voltaren. Is there anything I can do at that point other than that in the gym to maybe help out?
Oh, tough one. So then we're kind of just thinking, let's just put out the fire for a little bit.
Yeah, management. We're not fixing anything at that point. Just pure management.
Yeah. So look, if you weren't in a competition meet, or preparing for something, I'd say
don't do it.
We've got to just take it all back. We've got to give time for the body to recover. Blah 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 blah. And look, Voltaren's okay. You can certainly take it.
Yeah.
What can be effective is an isometric exercise. So simply doing a forced flexion or a flexion movement of the arm against resistance. You can do the same thing with a bent lever of the elbow as well. This is actually how we diagnose a biceps tendon issue. It's a resisted uppercut movement, and if that causes pain at your long headed biceps area, then that's a positive test. But you can start with some gentle isometrics, which there is some data to suggest they are pain relieving exercise. And then you just got to go with all the other things. You might consider an injection, you might consider putting ice on the area, but unfortunately the body just has to adapt to the load, and
it's going to take time.
We're up against biology there, and there's nothing we could really do.
Yeah, I guess it would mainly come down to my side of things, which is what I've found in the past anyway. It's like, hey, okay, we're going to manage it via maybe a load reduction, like a week on week off approach, or a just pure volume. Okay, we're just going to do like a couple of sets of low bar, and then we're going to do some other squatting to make up the volume to try and keep your strength for the rest of the prep, and then get the competition, just work our way over the line. There's lots of ways around it, but I think the takeaway from this conversation is that it's super complex, and that we need to be addressing it year round and just trying to keep our strength through the shoulder, keep the scaps and the shoulder moving together as a unit, and all that jazz that we can define as like a healthy shoulder, instead of letting it just build up during prep and then trying to deal with it when it becomes an issue.
Yeah, and the classic principles will hold, like load modification, appropriate rest, adequate strength of the shoulders, adequate mobility of the shoulder, thoracic spine, and then proper programming and planning, which I assume is your job, and just trying to, dissipate and creep, like you're almost trying to creep up on tendons. Tendons hate an acute influx of load. They hate it. That's when they will get sore. They love to do things slowly and planned and orchestrated over time. And you give it 48 hours to respond, and it should be a little bit better.
Yeah.
Where it all breaks down is you do too much too soon. The tendon gets angry, and the biceps, and the bicipital groove has got nowhere to go. Pain will manifest, and then you're stuck with it, and then you're trying to manage it. And that's not optimal if you're trying to prepare for a meet.
Yeah, and just on that point, powerlifting, we should be able to do that pretty effectively, because it's literally the same exercises done in a very controlled state for sets and reps at X weight. So it should be really easy to go load it slowly. But I still see people go from sets of 10 on this like lower loaded squat to like chucking it like maxing triples, and you see it all the time. So like a great point, we should phase potentiate, we should jump between phases, we shouldn't be going from 100 kilos to 300 kilos week to week or anything like that. Avoid those big spikes. Super easy one, but people don't do it.
It's a human thing though, right? So, and it's not just the coach's fault. People are feeling good, they want to lift a little bit more, let's test the waters, let's see what we've actually got. And this is not something I think we can eradicate from the human species. We're all going to make mistakes, but
that's what coaching is.
Perhaps exactly
it's
right.
Trying to get people to do the right things at the right time.
Yeah,
in some way.
Yeah, but as you know, as a coach, people are hard to coach sometimes.
Yeah. All right. Any last points? Anything else you want to come on?
No, that's well. I'll just finish with not all pain at the front of the shoulder is long-headed biceps pain. So be careful with that if you are suspecting.
Powerlifters just go like, oh, sore.
Yeah,
sting.
Exactly. There is some nuance to it. So see a physio or see someone who knows what they're talking about, and they can help you out.